The night air around the park in Quahog was cold and strangely quiet. Streetlights flickered weakly over the empty walking paths while crickets chirped somewhere in the darkness. Brian Griffin and Stewie Griffin sat on a bench near the playground. Brian sighed as he sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup. "Man," Brian muttered, "dating in this town sucks." Stewie rolled his eyes. "Perhaps it's because you're an unemployed alcoholic dog who quotes Fitzgerald to college girls." Before Brian could answer, he spotted a woman walking along the path. She had dark hair, pale skin, and wore a red coat that fluttered in the wind. Brian immediately stood up. "Oh my God, she's gorgeous." Stewie looked unimpressed. "Oh dear, here we go." Brian straightened his fur and casually walked toward her. "Hey," he said with a smug grin. "You know, most women usually buy me a drink first." The woman stopped walking. Slowly she turned toward him. Her face looked emotionless. Then, smack! The slap echoed through the park. Brian stumbled backward, holding his cheek. "What the hell?" The woman said nothing. She simply walked away into the darkness without looking back. Stewie stared blankly. "Well, that was humiliating." Brian returned to the bench, defeated. "I don't get it," he muttered. "Every relationship I've had ends horribly." Stewie crossed his arms. "Brian, you're too old for this pathetic routine. You chase women because you're terrified of being alone." Brian looked away silently. The walk home felt longer than usual. That night, rain tapped softly against the Griffin house windows. Brian lay awake on his dog bed, staring at the ceiling. The slap kept replaying in his head. Every failed relationship, every breakup, every insult, every mistake. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him into sleep. Or at least, he thought it did. Brian suddenly opened his eyes. His room was dark. Too dark. The shadows looked thicker than normal, almost alive. He tried to move, but couldn't. His chest tightened instantly. "What?" His body refused to respond. Only his eyes moved. A low growling noise came from the corner of the room, then another, and another. Something slowly crawled out of the darkness. It looked like Jillian, but wrong. Her jaw hung unnaturally low, her eyes completely black. Her limbs bent backwards with loud cracking noises as she crawled across the floor toward him. Brian tried screaming. Nothing came out. More figures emerged, every woman Brian had ever dated. Each one twisted into something horrifying. One had skin peeling from her face. Another smiled so wide her cheeks split open. One dragged herself across the floor with broken arms, leaving dark streaks behind her. "You ruin everything," one whispered. "You always leave," another hissed. "You destroy everyone around you." Brian's breathing became frantic. The creatures climbed onto the bed. One dug claws into his chest. Another grabbed his jaw and forced his mouth open. Then they began tearing into him. Not like animals. Slowly, deliberately. Fur ripped away, bones cracked, blood splattered across the walls while Brian silently convulsed, unable to move or scream. The last thing he heard before waking was, "You deserve to be alone." Brian jolted awake. Morning sunlight poured into the room. He gasped for air, shaking violently. His fur was soaked with sweat. At first he thought it was just a nightmare, but then he noticed claw marks on the wall beside his bed. The episodes continued every night, each time worse than before. Brian stopped sleeping. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He became paranoid, anxious, irritable. Lois noticed. Peter ignored it completely. Stewie, however, watched carefully. One night he entered Brian's room carrying a strange handheld device. Brian looked terrible. "You look like roadkill," Stewie said bluntly. Brian shakily replied, "They keep coming back." Stewie's expression changed slightly. "They?" Brian explained everything. The paralysis, the demons, the voices, the pain. Stewie listened silently. When Brian finished, Stewie sighed. "Well, congratulations. Your subconscious has finally declared war on you." "What?" Stewie sat down. "Sleep paralysis is partially neurological, but in your case, your guilt is feeding it. Every failed relationship, every selfish thing you've done, every insecurity you bury, your brain manifests them when your body enters REM atonia." Brian stared at him blankly. Stewie continued. "You don't fear women rejecting you. You fear the idea that maybe they were right about you." The room became silent. Brian looked down at his paws. For once, he had no sarcastic comeback. That night, Brian forced himself to sleep. Again, he woke inside the paralysis. Again, the room darkened. Again, the creatures appeared. But this time, Brian stopped struggling. The demonic versions of his exes circled around him, grinning with rotting teeth. "You ruin everyone," one whispered. Brian swallowed hard. "Yeah," he admitted. The creatures paused. Brian's voice shook. "I hurt people. I lie. I push people away because I'm scared." The room trembled violently. "But I'm tired of running from it." One creature lunged toward him. Brian finally moved. He stood up. The demons shrieked. Their bodies began cracking apart like broken glass. Brian stared directly at them. "You're not real anymore." The shadows collapsed instantly. The room became silent. Warm morning sunlight slowly filled the space. Brian woke peacefully for the first time in weeks. No claw marks, no monsters, no whispers, just sunlight. Later that morning, Stewie found Brian sitting outside drinking coffee. "You alive?" Stewie asked. Brian nodded. "Yeah." Stewie smirked slightly. "Marvelous. Now perhaps you can stop whimpering in your sleep like a dying seal." Brian chuckled softly. For the first time in a long while, the darkness in his head felt quieter.